I basically invested about £7,000, and this is like 21 years ago,
Yeah.
into a hardcore 2-week MCSE training course. And I was really fortunate because my mum chipped some in, my granddad chipped some in, and then I kind of got to learn for the rest.
Welcome to another episode of Microsoft Mentors, the podcast. Microsoft Mentors is designed to lift the lid on the journeys of the most successful leaders in the Microsoft partner ecosystem. Every week, through candid conversations with founders, business owners, and technology thought leaders, we explore their strategies, grit, and lessons behind their growth and how they're building competitive advantage for the future. These are the untold stories and practical lessons from leaders who are defining success in Azure, AI, data, app innovation, and security. Our mission is simple: to tell partner stories at scale and create impactful Microsoft conversations. Hello and welcome to another episode of Microsoft Mentors, the podcast. And today I'm joined by Jason Revill. Hi Jason, how you doing?
Hello, yeah, I'm very good, thank you. How about you?
Yeah, not too bad. We're flying into this quite fresh on a Monday morning, aren't we, Jason? So we'll see if we can get our brains in gear.
Yeah, I'm 2 coffees in, so hopefully that's enough.
Yeah, that's the way. So I guess, Jason, just to very quickly start off, it'd be good to just get a little bit of an intro in terms of who you are, what your role is, just for the listeners to get a bit of a feel for what you're doing.
Sure. So, my name's Jason Revill. I work for Avanade in the global part of our organization, where I have the slightly long-winded job title of Global Security Technology Lead. And what that effectively means is I'm responsible for the strategy and direction globally for our security practice, as well as our technology relationships, with Avanade is predominantly targeted at Microsoft, but we've got some very good, strong partners as well that we work with in that space. And I have the perhaps the most fun part of my job is driving a lot of the innovation and the kind of technology advancement pieces that we do from a security perspective.
Yeah. And what does that security practice look like globally for Avanade then, in terms of size of employees and things like that?
Yeah, so we're operating in about, I think it's 19 countries. We've got well over 600-700 onshore Microsoft security professionals who also hold many industry and partner certificates as well as a pretty strong offshore contingent as well. So yeah, we're pretty well geared up. I would say we were probably one of the first at this game of Microsoft security expertise and consultancy through to managed services and the rest.
Yeah, and I think most people, in the industry, it does surprise me that some people don't know. It'd be good if you could just explain a little bit about the dynamic at Avanade with sort of Microsoft, Accenture, and what that looks like in terms of the business as a whole.
Yeah, we are pretty unique. It was one of the things that attracted me to Avanade, actually. But I think we've just hit our 25th birthday, which aligns with Microsoft's 50th birthday that's kicking off this year. And we were the industry's first kind of, and I think only, joint venture between Microsoft and Accenture. So, very forward thinking really for the 2000s, but some very clever people in Accenture and some very clever people at Microsoft thought, wouldn't it be great if we invested in a really Microsoft specialized arm that had the best of both? And Avanade was effectively born. And since that day, our goal has really been to be the lead digital innovator on whatever Microsoft do, we do at global scale with deep expertise, delivery experience, managed service competency, and differentiation woven throughout.
Yeah, interesting. That it's such a sort of a clean alignment as well. So pretty much for half of Microsoft's whole life as a business, Avanade has been there as a joint venture with Accenture to drive that digital innovation out into the wider ecosystem, which is cool.
Yeah. We like to say, Accenture are obviously pretty much the biggest and best from a, service systems integrator and services provider. So all that methodology, all that expertise was baked into Avanade from the start. And then Microsoft brought all the technology centricity that we all specialize in. So it's kind of the best of both, best of mixed.
Yeah. And then if we sort of flip it on to you and your career, Jason, I'm always really interested to understand where those sort of technology, I guess, where the technology passion starts with in leaders within the Microsoft ecosystem, and then what that, that ladder and runway up to where you're at now looks like. So I guess for you, where did the tech journey start in terms of, getting into technology pre-employment and then moving into the workforce?
Well, I think I maybe took a slightly different path, although not too dissimilar to my buddy Tim Callahan, who you had on recently from
Yeah.
IBM, in as much that, neither of us were kind of university educated, but I took actually a modern apprenticeship path.
Yeah.
So I'm from East Yorkshire, and for anyone who knows East Yorkshire, kind of Hull, Beverley, Bridlington, that area, there's not a huge amount of technology opportunity. I was really fortunate because my mum had always been quite active with PCs.
Yeah.
And so I'd shown an early interest, but I actually didn't even realize there was like a career in computers. I thought they were just something you use. And I got to about 17 years old, and I'd not done super well in education. And I went to the careers center and typed in the things I was good at, and actually it said, why not try a career in what they called back then ICT, right?
Yeah.
Information Computing Technology. And it connected me with an apprenticeship provider in Hull. And then I was living in Bridlington at the time, so I basically used to get the train to Hull, which was be about 45, 50 minutes, and then walk. Sounds like a really old school story, but walk about 2 miles to the apprenticeship centre from the station because I couldn't afford a taxi or anything to get there.
Yeah,
And I just don't think I was very good at buses, I imagine. But yeah, so it was a big commitment. And what they did was effectively, I studied initially in hardware, so how to build PCs and do the basics from a software perspective. And they found me a placement in a school, which was in hindsight absolutely fantastic because in a school environment you have to do everything. So it was from there that I kind of really started my career with all of 6 weeks training behind me in terms of how to build and set up a PC. Obviously did the standard thing and went home and demolished a PC and never quite got that one working again. And then from there went into building PCs in a school environment, learning how to domain join them, then learn about Active Directory, and then from there you get into file services, server services, how to stop the kids doing naughty things on the internet, and they do some really weird stuff. So using ISA server to go and blacklist dodgy websites, and yeah, just kind of went from there really, and went to then moved from one school to another to get a different set of experiences and cut down on the commute. And I guess things really kind of took off when I went from that school environment where I completed an MCSE. So I basically invested about £7,000, and this is like 21 years ago, into a hardcore 2-week MCSE training course. Just because the way I learn, I don't learn very well by reading. I have to kind of do, and this 2-week course kind of let me do and do the exams at the same time. I was really fortunate because my mum chipped some in, my granddad chipped some in, and then I kind of got to learn for the rest. And then once I had that, I actually didn't even get the MCSE. I got an MCSA, but that was enough. And then it started accelerating the options I had. So yeah, went from there to work in a boutique software house in Hull that actually provided all of the called APD communications. And they provided a lot of emergency services control room systems. So that was a real step up from an education environment to a kind of a private business that provided these services. And then from there to Humberside Police. And it was working for Humberside Police that an opportunity came up basically to design the police force's access mechanism to the police national database. And from there, I was the only one who put my hand up because I had such a broad set of skills by then across full Windows Server from AD, PKI, access management, all of this. And that's when I stumbled into a new set of Microsoft technologies called Microsoft Forefront.
Yeah.
And it was Forefront Identity Manager, Forefront Unified Access Gateway combined with AD, PKI, and smart cards that I built this kind of solid identity and access management foundation. And then I was headhunted for London because I had this kind of very niche skill set. Worked in London at a boutique doing FIM and UAG for a little while, and then effectively joined Avanade as an identity consultant. And I've been here ever since, over 13 years of effectively building and growing what was initially Avanade UK's security capability. And believe me, I had to do a lot of convincing to convince the business that Microsoft and security were actually a thing.
Yeah.
And I remember having to write a business case demonstrating the market. So it was kind of the first time I'd done like market analysis and like look at the potential, look what it could be. But at the time, Microsoft was still just released Enterprise Mobility Stack. They'd moved from Forefront to Microsoft Identity Manager, got rid of UAG. So the business was like, but what is there to do? And then suddenly they were like, oh, it's Enterprise Mobility and security. And suddenly Microsoft were advertising these security software capabilities like, AD RMS, Azure AD, MFA, the first kind of labeling capabilities were, that ended up becoming Purview. And from there, you can chart a course of kind of Avanade's Microsoft security explosion with Microsoft's, really, because we mapped it almost, in advance and built the practice from the ground up, centered around everything Microsoft was releasing, which has just been a pretty crazy journey when you look at from the history books. Microsoft and security was almost a joke when mentioned together to now being effectively the largest security company in the world. So I always say never bet against Microsoft because they will eventually turn it around.
No, 100%. I think it's interesting as well hearing that career story. I think especially in those early years in education, edtech, working in schools, the need to sort of dive into probably quite early on that Active Directory world, then that has almost been the sort of the foundation that you've then grown this career on, right? It's getting into a role, and from the sounds of it from you and how you think that modern apprenticeship was clearly the best route to go, because it's not just going and learning theoretically, it's getting upskilled quite quickly and then just getting into the weeds with it and actually getting hands-on with the technology in a production environment. And then you sort of built through from that and navigated your way through to excuse me, to specialize in quite a small area of Microsoft, really, in terms of FIM at that time, probably, wasn't it?
Oh yeah.
If we roll back to sort of that point when you pulled together that £7,000 to do the MCSE, what was the conversation there with yourself, with family? Did people think, oh, he's mental spending $7,000 on this, if there's no guarantee out the back of it? What was the sort of the thought process there? Because I always think there's a angel and a devil when people think about investing large sums in their own, personal development and certifications.
Yeah, it was. It wasn't something anyone in the family had ever done, and I was quite fortunate to have a pretty, entrepreneurial mindset granddad who was willing to invest. And my mum's advice was always, if you want to succeed, get really good at something no one else can do. And I was like, this is kind of that thing. Not many people can actually do this, certainly at that point in time, this will be about 18 years ago at this point. So both were really willing to back and support me with it. But they also kind of knew that I was earning some money and I could probably handle a bit of a loan. So they didn't take the full burden on, and I took the majority of the burden on. But it's probably one of the best investments I've ever made. And I think they certainly saw it in a similar light. Invest now and it will pay dividends in the future. And touch wood, it's worked out pretty well.
Yeah, it's interesting. The sort of the mindset that a lot of people haven't, I think right across the UK, is that we're all quite comfortable with going and spending, 30, 40 grand and having student loan to go to university. But, the thought of spending 7, 8, 9 grand cold hard cash for a more conventional loan is something that you don't really see people doing that much. Which is crazy. We were more than happy to walk around with much bigger sums as long as it's in the student loan box rather than the personal loan box, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and it's obviously it's a different type of investment because for me it was the foundations were there, but it was bringing the additional learning, the additional structuring to really nail the exams that prove the learning is there, right? So it was something very different. Like I've never invested in myself in that way, but it proved to be pretty fundamental, really, to the rest of my career.
Yeah, yeah. And I think another interesting point in your career is, the first 6, 7 years in education, working at Humberside, so working more in those either product-led businesses or internal roles. Then there's the shift over into technical consultancy and identity consultancy, so going much more into that customer-facing role, which has got lots more elements. You're not just there to deliver a solution for the business that you're working for, you're there as a representative of Avanade, and there's so many more different moving parts than that when it comes to stakeholder management. So I guess, did you feel there was a need around sort of some of those softer consultancy skills to upskill on those bits? How did you sort of go about that side of the transition into those types of roles?
Actually, it's a good question and quite a funny response, I guess, or at least funny from my perspective. But actually, I learned all of my customer service skills by working in a supermarket. So while I was, I think I just turned 16, I got my first kind of job at Safeways, if you remember Safeways.
Yeah,
God,
yeah.
I feel old now, but yeah, Safeways, who were bought by Morrison's. And actually, I didn't get the job the first time because there was a question on the entry exam that said, if someone comes to you with a complaint, how would you respond? And I basically ticked probably the very wrong box about that was not very customer minded. But somehow, and I can't remember exactly how, but I got to retry and I selected the right box, which was obviously to something about telling the manager or something instead of probably gobbing off, which was probably the more mindset I was in at the time at 16.
Yeah.
But it was from there that I really kind of start to build a foundation. Well, actually, you've got to be really careful with how you present yourself because if you create a bad experience, that's something that's like, 10 times more likely to be shared than a good experience. And if you create a good experience, they'll share it, but nowhere near as fast as a bad experience. And it really started to establish the core foundations of knowing your customers, providing a good experience, providing a good service, being somebody and developing other people who present themselves in a way and engage in such a way that customers want more, right? And I think that is where I built my very foundational consulting skill set, working on produce at Safeways, because I really liked working, I had the kind of a common set of customers and we chat and I get them what they needed and they were always happy afterwards. And, it really was quite foundational, but you'd never think something like that as a soft skill would be developed in a supermarket that would prepare you for consultancy later in life. But if I hadn't done that, I would have probably been a little bit more brash, a little bit, hard around the edges, where I think that actually helped me get in a better mindset for that sort of work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that, like, when you say that, I think back to my own sort of life and career, and a lot of my job doing what I do is small talk. It's talking to people. It's starting conversations, leading conversations, and as you're saying that, I'm thinking, well, where does that come from in me? And so when I finished university, I went and lived in France and worked in the ski industry for 3 years. And part of my job there was to do the airport transfers. So that's 2.5 hours sat in a car with a load of people that have just turned up off a plane and they're on their holidays and they want to have a good time and they want to talk to the driver. So I think about that, and that's probably my safe way is sitting in that van, driving up and down from Geneva Airport, telling people what the snow's like and, where to go and all of that sort of thing, building that quite instant rapport, and making people have a good overall experience effectively.
Yeah. Those first jobs are so important, especially if you kind of do well at them. You don't really fully realize it at the time, but yeah, I'd definitely be encouraging my daughter to kind of get some real work experience dealing with people, because you can pretty much learn anything you like, right? But dealing with people is a special skill set all to itself, right?
Yeah. And so we're sort of back into to the Avanade world now, and you sort of started building that business case together in terms of what a security practice should and would look like for Avanade. What did the early years of that practice look like in terms of growth of the practice and also your own growth as the leader within that?
Well, it was quite a funny situation because we were kind of the team I'd started building was buried within another team. It was called the infrastructure team, and there was only about 6 of us that I'd kind of incubated and cross-trained, brought along on the journey. And funnily enough, again, to link back to Tim, it was actually Tim Callahan who was running infrastructure. And so part of the convincing was to convince him that this was the right thing to do, as well as convincing the general manager and other folk in the business. So
was that convincing Tim to steal some of his team for your practice and move them across, especially?
Yeah, to basically convince him that this is the right move long term for these people and for this part of the business. And ultimately, he was very, very supportive, and it went on to benefit him longer term as well. But yeah, it was very much so. We agreed to do it, and so we carved out this team of 6 and established what was then called the Security Talent Community, which I was leading. And back then, I think I was a manager or something like that in the Avanade terminology. But it gave me this exposure to all these far more successful, larger talent community leaders like Tim and others who were running big practices, of like 80, 100 people, and I just had like my little 6. So it was a great experience to kind of then get to kind of share experiences and actually share ideas with them as well, coming from a different perspective. And then from there, it was all then the mission was keep these 6 people chargeable. It's consultancy, right? Chargeability is everything. And that's where I then, got very active in kind of developing the offerings, the things these people could do that sellers and other people could try and position to the customers. And back then we'd done some pretty big deliveries just as us 6, some of the first sort of what you'd call Microsoft security transformations. So packaging up those success stories, packaging up what actually went into making them successful, creating bronze, silver, gold versions, all that stuff, and then letting and educating the sales teams know that actually you've got this capability now that you can sell to your customers. And back then we're talking, MIM deployments and Active Directory security opportunities, very early days, Azure AD and Azure MFA. Back when there was the MFA server and, you had a lot of hands-on to get that up and running. Some of the very earliest Azure RMS, and other types of solutions. So basically,
at that point when you're still the team of 6, Jason, and you're transitioning into doing that sort of more go-to-market side of things and offering, on the flip side, are you still positioned to have your own, utilization and billability? So you're still out as a consultant, doing the consultant job as well, I guess. So how did you balance that in terms of, knowing that you've got to do your day job as a consultant, but also take on all these more responsibilities that you built in around the management side?
Well, it was, I guess, a blessing and a curse that I had to work from home a lot. We won't go into the curse side of things, but effectively I was away from home for quite a few days a week in London. Bearing in mind I'm living in East Yorkshire, right? Yeah. So I had a lot of evenings, I had a lot of time on trains, and I must have been working for a good few years quite silly hours. But again, I saw it as investing because I'm doing the work that needs to be done to keep these people busy, but also to create more demand so I can hire more people and grow, right? And the way I saw it was, I can either invest all this time and energy now while I'm sat on a train at 6 a.m. or I'm in a hotel room on my own, right? And actually, quite sadly, I quite enjoyed it, right?
Yeah,
Ultimately,
yeah,
there's a reason I've been Avanade 13 years is because I really love what I do. I really enjoy being able to do these things with very little oversight as well, right? I'm kind of left to my own devices. So it was an investment that, again, paid dividends now because I've got a fantastic work-life balance now, and my daughter's 2.5 years old, and that's really important to me now that I got all these things done before life happened effectively, and I now work from home. I'm in a global role because I've created these foundations, built that trust, built that reputation. So really, and it's one of the trickier discussion points I have with a lot of the team now is that unless you really invest and kind of try and go above and beyond, it is hard to stand out in consultancies. It is hard to distinguish yourself from someone else who's doing a very similar job, right? Because if you're just both very chargeable, just both doing great client deliveries, how are you going to stand out against that person? And there are so many opportunities in consultancies to demonstrate your expertise, to develop skills in new areas. And that's what I was effectively doing, was learning these things so that I could accelerate the people who worked for me, because I bear in mind I was trying to help their careers progress as well. That was very important to me and always has been. And I was effectively be along for the ride.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think you hit a good point there. Is in what is a very competitive landscape in consultancy, it's how do you stand out from the other person in your team, or even another person in another business doing the same role as you. And if you want to progress and take that next step in your career, whether that's into a more senior technical role, whether it's into more of a leadership management type role, you've got to build additional skills around on top of what you're doing now to be able to make that move into the next piece. So we fast forward up to sort of today, and you're obviously leading the security practice globally. So I guess what does your role look like now in terms of your day to day? I guess you're probably not hands on the tools as much as you were before.
Not as much, though I try and keep a finger on the mouse, as it were, especially in the Gen AI space, because I've effectively led most of our Gen AI security pieces, especially around Security Copilot from a Microsoft perspective.
Yeah.
It suits me quite well because I've never been good at development, but I'm pretty good at prompting, so that works quite well for my skill
Yeah.
set alignment. So my day to day now is very much, I've got a whole Kanban board of all the activities running across the practice. So we're driving innovation opportunities with Microsoft where we're design partners, and we've secured those design partnerships through the relationships that we built with the product group, and I really pride myself on establishing and attaining new design partnerships year over year. So we were a design partner for Security Copilot, for example, design partner for their new SDK for Purview, which integrates data security into Gen AI, and there's others on the roadmap. But I also look after the kind of the interlock with Accenture security as well, which is really interesting because they're obviously slightly ginormous. But I provide a lot of inputs and support for them on their go-to-market strategies with Microsoft Security as well, which is really, really exciting. As well as then the practice itself. So one of the biggest things I've managed to achieve this year was establishing what we call global communities of practice. So I'm really keen about kind of removing the barriers and borders between regions and collaboration. So the global communities of practice are a place where everyone in the practice can sign up for whichever ones they want to be in. So for example, there's one for identity, one for data security, one for Gen AI security, threat protection, and so on. And these become the place people can go to get help, to ask questions, to provide answers, to share updates, what's going on, maybe some cool delivery work they've done, some cool assets they've developed. but it's also allowed me to establish a new layer of leadership called community of practice leaders. And their job is to actually interlock with Microsoft engineering and bridge the community of practice and engineering together, which is a great opportunity for those individuals who volunteered to do that, because it builds their relationship with Microsoft, builds their relationship with their community, and starts to build those leadership skills as well. So that's created quite a new generation of leadership talent there. But it's actually through that symbiotic relationship that, because we've got hundreds of practitioners working on Microsoft technology every day, the feedback for potential for Microsoft is massive, because that's what the engineering team we feed off of, right? So keeping that flowing is really important, as well as then big programs. So what initiatives are we driving? So I'm working on one pretty big initiative now that we're going to announce soon, and that takes a lot of leadership and guidance and input across architects and offshore teams and asset developers and stuff like that. So it really is a super mixed bag. If you saw my diary, it's an absolute car crash. But we're always moving forwards, we're always progressing, we're always developing. So it's we're never standing still. And I don't want us to ever stand still, right? Because then we're going to get behind.
Yeah. And I think from the sounds of that, for you, and you alluded to it there, is that growing and nurturing and developing that those future leaders within the practice is so important, because if you want to stay on that continued growth trajectory as the practice smack my microphone as the practice continues to grow, you're going to need more leaders and more leaders, and the leaders that you've got now, as the practice grows, they'll step into the being the senior leaders in the future. But then who's going to come in behind them and develop them? So I guess if you're having conversations with people in your practice, someone's on that sort of pathway, maybe like you were before, where they've been a senior consultant, they're moving into their first manager or group manager type role. What sort of advice and mentorship do you give those sort of people in terms of that transition and picking up that leadership mantle on top of their day job? I thought we'd take a very quick break from this week's episode of Microsoft Mentors, the podcast, to just talk a little bit about why the podcast and the community that it serves is so important to us as part of our purpose here at Cloud Decisions, and the purpose it drives within the wider Microsoft ecosystem. We've been involved here at Cloud Decisions in the Microsoft ecosystem for over a decade now, working with Microsoft partners and businesses with strong alignment to Microsoft technologies and their technology teams to help them to grow and scale their teams in cloud, security, data, and AI. For the past year, we've been working really hard behind the scenes to develop 2 core talent solutions that are built with our customers in mind and enable Microsoft-aligned businesses to access the talent they need to grow and scale their teams and ultimately hit their business objectives. We've developed CDX, our own proprietary talent intelligence system that uses custom AI, large language models and natural language processing to enable you as an organization, as a technology leader, to make insight-led technology decisions on all of your permanent hires, and gives us the data that we really need to take your role to market to execute the search. We've also been working with customers here in the UK and in the US through Global Source, our global talent solution that is built to enable organizations to build borderless technology teams for permanent, contract, and flexible outsourced resources. So if you're a Microsoft partner or you are a technology leader within a business with a strong Microsoft technology alignment, and you'd like to know a little bit more about how CDX could fuel your permanent hires or how Global Source could offer you a global talent strategy, then feel free to reach out. And now let's get back to this week's episode of Microsoft Mentors, the podcast.
I think there's a lot to be said, especially if you're going from a senior consultant, which is a very still quite technical role, into manager type roles in our sort of line of work. There's a really significant transition from doing to owning, right? And if you look at it from a delivery perspective, you might become more accountable for the delivery of a deliverable, but not actually the doing of a deliverable. But often, especially if you've got niche skills, you need to be thinking, well, who have I developed even before I made manager that would step into my shoes and be the technical expert on whatever it is? And because we've got quite a large pool, you would think there's always someone to fill those gaps. But, there is always someone who can learn more and do more relative to the person going from senior con to manager, right, who's gotten to that point because they've been the real technical expert. So it's really a case of have you been developing people on the way already? Or are you making a bit of a cold cut over and actually you've got to try and catch people up to fill that gap that you used to fill? Because that old persona that you had is going to kind of actually be what slows you down if you don't find a way of reinventing yourself as, person X, the manager versus person X, the senior consultant. Especially if you then want to progress over to director and higher, right? You've kind of got to make sure you're changing your mindset, elevating how you operate, whilst developing people to fill that void you've potentially left as well.
Yeah,
It's not
yeah,
an easy transition. It takes a lot of time for people, and in Avanade and perhaps others, the expectations really do change, and they have to, because if the expectations didn't change, nothing would change, right? When you went from career level to career level,
yeah.
especially with how you manage your own time and manage your own work. A lot of problem with people over promising, and things like that. It's a really tough one for people to break as well, because people want
Yeah,
to
and
do everything.
especially I think if you've been in, if we take that senior consultant example, if you've been in a team of senior consultants and you step into manager, chances are you're going to be managing people that you were peers with before. So there's another dynamic there, isn't it? It's like you see it in football, don't you? When the senior pro moves into player manager, there's always a difficult dynamic there in terms of, continuing to have those relationships with the team that you've been within, and that's ultimately what you want to be able to lean into, to sort of continue motivating and growing with the team, but also a degree of separation that allows you to do the leadership piece, right? And that is the difficult thing that people have to try and navigate in those sort of situations.
I think one of the best pieces of advice that I had that sums it up is good leaders create great leaders. You find a way to replace yourself, and find a way to elevate others, almost, and I do it almost to a point of trying to cut myself out, right? I always try and make it really visible where people have made contributions, whether I do it at the start of a presentation someone shared and I say kudos to these people, just so that doesn't get lost, in the annals of time, right? Like, it's really important to me for people to get the recognition they deserve, because it's so easily lost in the noise. And unfortunately, in this industry, there are far too many people, in my view, that take credit for other people's work, which is a real sad thing to see still in this day and age. But I really try and challenge myself all the time to try and advocate and enable others.
Yeah. And then if we sort of take a bit more of a focus in terms of, the technology side of things with you and the security practice at Avanade, what are the core trends? What are the core sort of, I guess, the direction of travel that you're seeing, that, there's demand from customers, the priorities that are coming down from Microsoft? What are the sort of 2 or 3 things that you see being on organizations' roadmaps for the next few years?
I think we've done fairly well to barely mention GenAI so far, right?
But we've made it 36 minutes in and we've not even really mentioned it yet. So
well, I touched on Copilot, but I think at the end of the day, the shift to, certainly from a cyber perspective, is how to make the GenAI work for them on security problems is a significant opportunity and challenge as well. Especially when it comes to the amount of autonomy it's given, the amount of decision-making rights that people are comfortable with is a big challenge. And then there is actually securing the use of GenAI, which is another huge challenge. I think the concept of shadow GenAI probably hasn't been spoken about enough, because there is going to be an absolute ridiculous volume of it going on out there. And Microsoft have responded really quickly in terms of being able to provide insights and value through their tool sets, like through Defender for cloud apps. You can quickly see which GenAI tools are being used in your organization and so on. And getting those integrated into Entra very quickly is quite an important step as well, right, in terms of locking them down and getting control.
Yeah. But you can look into that in quite a lot of detail, can't you? Once you've got it up and running in Defender, you can take it even down to sort of a prompt level, can't you, and see what people are doing within it.
And the Purview plugin in the browser, you can even start to block certain data exfiltration equivalent prompts and so on, right? Data uploads and so on. But but there's that element of shadow Gen AI, but then there are also the shadow internal Gen AI projects that security probably don't know about, where people are in Azure spinning up OpenAI instances or other models, and the framework, the guardrails for those are still pretty woolly is a bit of an understatement. So I think there's again tons of controls from Microsoft. They've added a huge kind of Gen AI module to Defender for Cloud now to help you detect the usage of those in Azure and then any kind of attempted attacks on those. But again, I could only ascertain that there is so much of that going on in the wild that isn't being secured properly, whether it's from a data perspective, an identity perspective, or from just being able to detect and respond to when it's having an issue. Yeah, I think that's going to be a significant piece. And there's research Avanade's done that talk about, the risks data security has around Gen AI and how it's slowing things down. Except you look at the stock market, it's not slowing down much, right? Because everyone's doing well out of it. So I think that's a hot topic. And I think just generally there's so much more awareness around resilience now, and so much more awareness around how to recover quickly, because as M&S will attest in their recent scenario, being able to recover quickly is becoming as important as having preventative controls in the first place. When Microsoft have strongly advocated assuming breach and having strong recovery mechanisms, but truly being able to recover at speed at a scale of a UK-wide or global retailer is a real challenge of our time to solve with a mixture of cloud and security expertise, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. With the risk factors around security and AI, how do you think that compares to the risk factors that we all sort of saw and felt in the early days of public cloud? Obviously, when public cloud came around, one of the the big questions that a lot of organisations had was they've got this current data center that they're in control of, and they can go and lock the front door on that data center, and all of a sudden in the cloud world they started moving it out of that physical premise and into Azure or AWS or wherever, and there was always the conversation about getting security to a position where an organization is comfortable with that. And I feel like we've come a long way when it comes to security in public cloud and sort of the conversation and mindset there. Do you feel like the risks with Gen AI are exponentially higher versus sort of that public cloud discussion that we were having 10 years ago?
I don't think they're exponentially higher. I would say Gen AI has really increased the focus on cloud security. I disagree with you in a bit in that there are tons, cloud security compromise is still, more common than it should be. And there's a lot more industry focus around external exposure management and being able to understand your weaknesses on the cloud perimeter. I think what Gen AI has done is it's provided another attack surface that is actually quite business or quite customer facing, because probably for the first time you've got almost unfettered control, between something that is client facing or public facing and the data that underpins it, right? And it's been proven that without the right controls, people can manipulate the Gen AI to do what it needs to do. There was a really scary CVE with Copilot recently, where just with an email, someone was able to trigger Copilot to go and do something it otherwise couldn't because it bypassed the traditional guardrails. Right. So I think the attacks are only just starting to emerge and or the potential attacks. And unless the data and the controls are strongly in place, it's going to become ever increasing headline driving compromises. The only sort of glimmer of hope I have, and I don't know if it's just a when rather than if, is just that right now it is quite hard to pin down any publicly recognized Gen AI compromises. If you Google it or research it or Copilot or ChatGPT it, there aren't 100, like you wouldn't find oodles of examples of breached AI yet, but a lot of the attackers are more using it to help themselves than targeting at this point.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
it's not fully in the kind of public sphere as of yet, right?
yeah.
So
Or we're
still tough.
already, or we're already halfway to Skynet, Jason, and all of the attacks that are happening right now are actually the AI doing it, and they're covering it up with human tracks, and they're not telling us that,
Yeah,
and they're not telling us that they're doing it.
it's a great conspiracy. I think I heard something about they tried to switch an instance of no, it was on Twitter, right? I think they had, oh, sorry, X. They had Grok integrated into it, and it very quickly became a pro-Nazi supporting entity that they had to switch off. So yeah, I still think there's a lot of room for growth and improvement. Fingers crossed it's never Skynet, but let's build our bunkers just in case.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Prepare
yeah.
that recovery strategy, right? That's the main thing.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And it's such an interesting time to be involved in the technology world. Like, I think we can all see the potential that Gen AI and AI generally has for all of our lives in terms of our day to day productivity, even it flowing through and helping out in your personal life. I've got a few friends that used to have personal trainers, and they just binned off their personal trainers, and they just get their training plans through ChatGPT, and they built a project in ChatGPT, and it does their nutrition and it does their training plan, and so there's so many applications of it, and
I literally just started doing that with Copilot just recently, and it's phenomenally helpful. I think there's so many consumer advantages to having it. They've not quite tied it well together yet with kind of Gen AI to sales, I don't think. I think there's huge upsell potential. Like when I think of the things I've recently bought because Copilot pointed out I needed them in my diet, like I don't know how Amazon's correlating sales to Copilot, but there should definitely be some linkage there from an e-commerce perspective. Uh, it's got such wide-reaching impacts. Even like my younger brother, I introduced it to, and now he had it helping guide him to fix his motorbike.
yeah,
Like, and he's not, like he's not trained as a mechanic, but working together, it's enabled him to do more, which is the dream of Gen AI, right? Microsoft were on point when they called it Copilot. It's there to assist you. It's there to help you fly the plane, not to fly the plane. So there is so much potential, and I'm developing with my teams a lot of the Avanade solutions in that space. And when the more you start to think of the problems, and you think, oh gosh, if we had an agent that could do this, it would really help benefit customers. And that's the way we can think now because we have these Gen AI platforms to help enable us to do it.
yeah, yeah. It's all about using AI to create competitive advantage, whether that is efficiency, productivity, rising faster than your competitor. And I think I've had this conversation a couple of times on the podcast. If you take two businesses and one really embraces and takes the competitive advantage that comes with AI and the other one doesn't, then the one that is got that competitive advantage is going to, accelerate and become, get a market advantage over their competitors for it. So really, really interesting dynamic that we're going through. And yeah, like I say, hopefully it doesn't turn into Skynet.
Yeah, I think the challenge is tracking and recognizing the value it brings is something we try and specialize in, especially for Security Copilot, because a lot of customers are generally their expectations are up here, and what it can do is about here, but actually still here is pretty helpful. But you have to feed it the right use cases, and you have to embed it very deeply into your organizational processes to recognize up to there. And then eventually it will get up to there, but unless you've built that foundation to here, you're going to have a lot higher to climb, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess it'd be good for anyone that's not sort of really deep into the sort of the Microsoft Copilot world yet. I think most people, when they hear Microsoft Copilot, they think about the little chat bit that you've got on your edge and your ability to use it. I guess where does Security Copilot specifically fit within that, and how is it different to the outside view of Copilot that some people might have?
It's totally different, to be honest. It's a completely separate experience. Microsoft have been pretty clever. They've not only deeply embedded it in the security products themselves, so that, for example, in Defender, when you've got an incident, it's already working on a summary of that incident and giving you the next steps before you've even started reading it, right? Really slick. Or it's got this separate standalone experience where, for a more experienced user, you can actually really tailor it to your workflow and your standard operating procedures to get it to do what you need it to do. There's some great customization options for third-party integrations. So, if you want it to go and read a external threat intel source that's maybe really important to your workflow, you can basically just develop a logic app to go and do that. And now with agents, you're going to basically be able to wake up every day and have it tell you the things you should go and focus on. And in places, it will be recommending and providing remediations and things like that, which is shifting much more to that kind of more from reactive to more proactive use of GenAI in security. It's fairly separate from the rest of the Copilot ecosystem, but I think they've just released an update to connect Copilot Studio with it as well. Hopefully that's not NDA, but anyway, so that kind of they'll start bringing the worlds together. But from a security perspective, it is a very security specific experience. I mean, it's a very security specific model they've developed for it as well.
Yeah, and with that agentic part of it, historically, pre-AI, what sort of person would have been doing that role? And do you think the introduction of that agentic side of, specifically here in Security Copilot, but broader across wherever agentic AI is being used, do you think there's an impact in a need to have a person that would have done that job before? Do you think there's a risk that agents take over those roles in the future?
Well, we strongly advocate for, letting Copilot assist you so that you've got more time to do what matters to the business or for you, whether that's training and development, whether that's just focusing on more complex tasks. Let Copilot kind of take some of the weight off your shoulders, or even if, and this is a big problem in the SOC, is kind of burnout and the kind of the risk of burning out your talent because they're so overwhelmed and so overloaded. Let it take the edge off, let it do the repetitive tasks, and then that gives you what I like to call the gift of time, and how you choose to spend that. I would recommend it's, for the betterment of the business and for yourself, personally or what have you. I mean, gosh, go and do 30 minutes of yoga if Copilot's giving you back 30 minutes, right? Just to de-stress and just to kind of get yourself sorted, because in security, it's always on, right? It's always coming at you. So if it can give you that bit of time, then use it.
Microsoft Quickfire Round, it's just, I guess, a little bit of a dig into different parts of you and your world. Just quick, short answers for all of them. So, I mean, I guess this one might be slightly longer, and it always is maybe slightly longer, but if you go back to Jason going into his modern apprenticeship and knowing what you know now, what advice would you have for Jason at day one walking into that school in your first job?
I probably have advised that version of me to learn more coding skills sooner. It's always a weakness I had, and I never properly tackled it because I found ways to work around it thanks to the UI. But I would, if I could kind of reset anything, and maybe I still will with AI's assistance, it would be getting just a better understanding at the code level.
Yeah. In the Microsoft cybersecurity world, obviously the tech skills are really important. What's one of the soft skills that you think is really underrated?
I think listening is probably up there, especially to customers and customer requirements. But also, the adverse of that is actually just, kind of being confident in your expertise and being willing to share it as well, because ultimately as a consultant, that's what you're there for. And you have to take confidence that you've put all that time and energy in, you're in a strong position to advise, so you should take it.
100%. I always like to see what people's answers are to this one. I've used it a few times. What's your favorite Microsoft product or suite of products, if you want to, of all time?
I will always have a soft spot for FIM and MIM, just it's not the most impactful product in the world. It's nothing like, Copilot or Office or something like that. But for me personally, it just taught me so much. It was probably the single biggest technology hurdle I've ever had to train to overcome. It's the first product I fully opened up and was like, I have no idea what I'm doing here. I need help. And that one taught me to kind of ask for help properly for the first time in a serious way. Like I had to go and get training to figure out how to use it. And it taught me how to work with so many different aspects. With identity management, you're dealing with HR teams, application teams, you're doing data transformation, you're doing end-to-end attribute flows, you're responsible for a lot of potential damage. And believe me, I caused a bit of damage in my time, right? And it kind of teaches you a lot of technology respect and impact. It's a very, it was a career-defining product in a weird way. I was very humbled by FIM when I configured it incorrectly and it made mistakes and so on.
Yeah. I think that was my gut feeling of where it might be. It's kind of one of those technologies that's been the key to unlocking the sort of, the career for yourself at Avanade over the last 13 years, isn't it?
Well, and I think as well for me, it was the first thing that taught me the importance of developing people better than you. Like I quickly identified I had a lot of gaps in my personal skills that were holding me back in that space. So I found some great developers. If Kunal and Tan are listening, like you guys really unlocked the potential of that, and I was able to show you the way, but then you took it on and made it something more than I ever could, and that taught me a lot about leadership and enabling others as well. So yeah, funny how a product can unlock so much, but that's what it had to be, because it's the glue of an organization's identity. So unless that glue is really solid, it's going to come to pieces.
Yeah, definitely. Next one. There's 3 more questions for the quickfire round. So this one really unpicks how deep Microsoft run through your veins, Jason. When it comes to your personal laptop devices, are you Windows or are you Mac?
I'm always going to be Windows.
Always. You'd be surprised how many closet Mac hiders there are out there in the Microsoft.
I did transition to iOS mobile, but mainly because I wanted a better camera to capture pictures of my daughter. But yeah, I'm still very Windows. But to be honest, I'm nowhere near the level of technophile as probably some of the other guests. I really, once the workday is done, I will switch off from technology as much as I'm able, and I'd much rather be reading like some Stephen King or some fantasy fiction, because for me it's enough just dealing with it during the day. I need to create that separation.
Well, it leads me nicely into my next question. So if you weren't in tech, if that's not the career you'd end up doing, what else do you think you might have ended up doing?
Gosh, well, according to my early career questions, I should have been a history museum curator, apparently. Maybe that's what I call my personality backdrop is a symbolism is positioning things and putting things in the right place. But that's what I call this, by the way, my personality backdrop, introduced during COVID. Like you've got your medals and it's all trying to get across part of who you are, right? So who knows? Maybe I would have been a museum curator. It's hard to imagine doing anything else after 21 years. But I think what my purpose is, what I've done a lot of thinking over the years, is I just like solving problems and fixing things.
Yeah,
that's what I'm in it for, and a big part of that is moving things forwards.
Cool. And then final one, you've just been given a big duffel bag of cash, no limitations, pick you and the family up and go on holiday. Where are you heading to?
Oh gosh, with a 2.5-year-old. We've just done Disney Paris. That was interesting. I don't know. I mean, I love kind of the natural wonders. I've fortunate enough to see a few. So I'd probably go doing quite a lot of road tripping, maybe around Canada, kind of down through the US into Mexico, and see some of those sorts of things. I just love like Niagara Falls is amazing. I managed to see that from the Canada side, which is, so they say, the better side to see it from. but the pyramids were fantastic as well. So just big, wonderful, generally not shops type things.
Yeah, sounds very, very similar to me. Well, Jason, thanks very much for your time. It's been amazing to find a little bit more about your journey and your insights into the ever evolving landscape that is Microsoft security, especially in the era of AI. As always, I'll tag Jason in all of the podcasts. So wherever you listen, you can go and find him, connect with him on LinkedIn, say hello, and we'll catch up again soon.
Thank you all.